Hello everyone and welcome to the first of 5 workshops in a series titled Ignite Passion, Deliver Results, curated to discuss 5 key topics over the next 5 weeks. So do register and share the info and follow us on social media. But before we go forward, let's look at some house rules. Please do be on mute and keep your videos on where possible, as it will be nice to see some other faces instead of our own. In most cases, it's Jennifer, Vidusha, the only faces I get to see. So if possible, do switch on do turn on your videos. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but do send in your cues at any time during the discussion to the number on the screen or share it via the chat option. There will be a 45-minute discussion followed by a 15-minute Q&A at the end. This session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, and we will share the link in case you missed parts of it and for those who are not able to join us this afternoon. So let's dive right in. Today's topic is how to show up at the workplace. You finally made it to the big league. Your work has paid off. You've landed this dream job. And let that sink in. Once that has sunk in, take a moment to ponder. Now what? What will define us now? How will we truly add value to the organization? How will we leave a legacy that our children will be proud of? Now, this is what we want to explore in retrospect. What is the real value and attitude that one brings to the corporate table on a daily basis? Basically, how do you show up at the workplace? Well, before we move any further, I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, the training arm of High Five Consultancy. And joining me this afternoon is Vidusha Nathavitharana, who is the founder and Destiney architect of High Five Consultancy. A little bit about Vidusha. He is a seasoned trainer and a consultant with over 15 years of hands-on experience. Having led HR and HRD initiatives that have won accolades globally, Vidusha has the ability to simplify the complex without diluting it. He has run assignments in over 12 countries globally. And joining him this afternoon is a face familiar to most of you, Jennifer Randive, who is the founder of Focus Direct Management Consultants. Now, Jennifer has over 30 years working in different industries from retail, sales, exhibitions, recruitment, headhunting, to change management. Today, she facilitates people into different approaches to address things differently. She is the Maverick CEO, the coach, the mentor, the counselor, and the consultant, which she uses interchangeably as required. She empowers individuals to become leaders in their personal and professional life and living. Now back to our topic. As we explore this topic, we will understand that things tend to get a little hot under the collar and a little uncomfortable. And this happens once the dust has settled in and the novelty has waned in a job. We are shaking the shackles of complacency. We are drawing the curtains to unveil the employee-employer perspectives on showing up at the workplace. So there are 5 areas that we will look at today and dive right in to the first one. Your attitude defines you. Think about it. The word attitude, does that make you cringe? We've heard enough and more quotes on positive attitude, the right attitude, attitude of gratitude, attitude being everything. But honestly, attitude is possibly one of the most varying human attributes there possibly is. I mean, depending on how you woke up and whether or not you spilt your coffee on your favorite shirt or favorite blouse, your attitude for the day is going to be impacted, and it would matter. Now, each of us are fighting our own battles, personal battles, which, whether we like it or not, will also impact our attitude for the day. But the question, I guess, is, what is this elusive but desirable attitude that employers want or employers desire and employees struggle to maintain? And I want to throw this question at Jennifer. So Jennifer, tell us your thoughts on what this elusive attitude is from an employer and an employee perspective.
We imagine as employers that the employees must have all the answers and must have all the solutions and actually must have everything in place which they have received possibly in a training or not. But on the other side, there's this level of ambiguity that I constantly see. And the ambiguity is there is hardly any engagement going on between the employer and the employee. They think usually that once you have received a job description or you have been told this is what you have to be delivering, and then after that it's like go around and try and do it yourself. But I think the level of engagement has to improve very importantly. And the second thing that I've seen is this, that employees usually wait to be told what to do. And I'm asking all employees, as I ask myself also that question, is like, what are you there to deliver? What can you actually create that will relate to the enhancement of the organization? So attitude for me is a culmination of your thoughts, feelings, and emotions and how you're showing up in your own life. Because if you don't show up in your life, guess what? You ain't going to show up in anyone else's life or business or anything. That's what my perspective is.
Vidusha, I'm going to just to answer that. Can I throw in something else as well in there? And I know you're going to dive into talking about attitude, but can you also touch on maybe how does one shift their attitude, and how do we pin that attitude in place while you talk about attitude?
Okay, I'm gonna take a slightly different shift. I can't agree with Jennifer more, but let me try and kind of pin this from the perspective of both sides of the fence. I think we have the luxury of being our own bosses in certain ways. We've also been on the other side of the fence where we've worked for long years for organizations. And I think I need to just clarify this, right? I think one of the problems that we've always had is that attitude, what we mean by having the right attitude. I think shifts from organization to organization and from boss to boss. I think that's really important to understand. So 9 times out of 10, what happens is, and I'm permitted to kind of joke around a little bit, right? I can't see everybody's faces, so I don't know whether people are laughing or whether people are cussing me.
Yeah.
But I've always maintained that there are just 3 things in life that you need to sort out. The first is your marriage, and the second is your employment, and the third are your in-laws. If you've sorted that out, I think life is fine. So I look at absolutely everything in that context, right? So your boss, believe it or not, I think most of us spend more time with our bosses than with our spouses. We talk to them more, we interact with them more, we see them more. And I think that's a relationship that needs to work. So attitude, unfortunately, I think we need to kind of reflect back from the perspective of who demands it of us. And I say this often, right? For any one of us who married our childhood sweetheart and remain with them, life is hunky-dory, you've known her for all time. But if you haven't been so lucky, then, well, you can't really compare your current girlfriend or wife or partner or husband or spouse to the one that you knew some time ago. And we make this issue with bosses as well because bosses shift. And when that happens, attitude, what the organization demands of you, even though we use the word organization, there is no organization, right? We work with people and it's a combination of people, and different people look at attitude differently. I'll give you just one example, right? So I had a boss who actually was an engineer by profession. And if you just take the MBTI kind of, basic personality profile, he's a classic introvert. I borderline between introversion and extroversion. He is a nut picker and a mud cracker of the nth degree. And he goes into absolute finite detail of everything. And he worked on the Channel Tunnel. His manuals were 3,500 pages of font size 8. I am more broad brush stroked, as you can see from the wall behind me. And they're slightly crooked, yes. And I don't mind as long as it's not fully crooked. But my boss would actually see this and tell me that, I don't have attention to detail. Now, what is the attitude then? So what my boss demanded of me was a personification of what he saw as what he wanted. Now, I have an option here. I can either accommodate that, accept it, and try and work around those parameters, or I can rebel against it. That's my personal wish. However, either which way, what I wanted to establish was the fact that attitude is in the eyes of the beholder. And you really don't have a universal truth in it. Now, come home to my wife. My wife is probably one of the most easygoing people you find. And if you actually tell her, you need to have certain things in exact same space, in exactly the same way that you've always had it, she's going to think you have OCD, right? So I think you need to look at the context of that. So that's one. The final one I want to kind of place on it before I kind of, I hope I answered that question, is how do you therefore make sure that you have the right attitude as far as the organization is concerned? I think it's about being aware about whom you're working with and not changing yourself, but trying and managing that expectation best you can. Because I do think that what is expected of us, even from the perspective of our own attitude, and we'll come into the other aspects of showing up and being proactive and things like that later on, because I know that's part of the conversation that's going to unfold, so I won't jump into it. But I think that's the primary focus. And as long as we are conscious of that and we are conscious of ourselves and how we innately behave, I think the oscillation between the two will determine whether we are seen in a positive light or a negative light, is how I would look at it.
All right. Jennifer, any thoughts? I can see the cogwheels churning at the back.
Yes, indeed.
I agree with you on everything, Vidusha. And it's also interesting to see how people, if they can stop separating themselves from actually being at work, I have to be like this, and at home, I have to be like this, and actually look at ourselves as being just the one person who is doing our very best to truly be the change or create a change. I think that there would be something that we all should be open to looking at, and not put ourselves in compartments and compartmentalize ourselves, because it's very tiring, number one. It's not at all enjoyable. No. And thirdly, it is like you're rejecting and judging yourself continuously, which is really a pain at the end of the day. And it's exhausting.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
really,
Which is why probably we are exhausted after work, isn't it?
absolutely. I think more than anything else, we've got to bring the fun element, Vidusha,
Sure.
and,
Sure.
and everyone else there.
Absolutely.
If I was to pose a question to everyone out there, if I could actually see you guys, I would like you all to raise your hands and say, how many of us truly would like to have some fun in the work that we do? Can I have anybody saying, yes, for me it is,
Yeah.
hell yes.
Yeah, sure. Why
Yes,
not?
Of course.
So where's
Can
the
I
fun
just throw
gone?
one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Can I just throw one more thing in there? See, I think one of the things that that we constantly fail to understand is that we are who we are fundamentally, I think, and we need to accept it. Now, can we become better versions of ourselves? Absolutely. Can we do better? Absolutely. So I think there's one thing that we, as human beings, I think we do have a sixth sense of intent and intention. And as long as we are trying to do the right thing, and as long as we are trying to kind of really add value, and we are trying to honestly help, I think that comes through, irrespective of our personality, irrespective of our little quirks and idiosyncrasies. I think that comes through. I think that's the primary key. So as long as what you're doing comes from a place of, I really want to help, I really want to add value, I think even if you did something wrong, you're forgiven for it. So I think that also plays a part in the whole attitude thing, because the moment you have that trust from your peers, from your colleagues, and from your bosses, from your wife, from your children, you might not necessarily behave in a certain way that they appreciate, or maybe you lose your temper, or maybe you do something wrong. But as long as that trust is there, he's trying to do something right, or he's trying to do something that is helpful. As long as that's deeply embedded and deeply understood, I think a lot of things fall in place.
Agreed.
Excuse me, I have an interruption here, if you allow me. This is Samira Shibibi.
Yes, Samira, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Here I will talk about, I have a feedback regarding the positive and negative attitude. And sometimes the positive attitude, once you empower it, I'm talking if you are a leader or a manager or a director, you are managing a group of people, a group of team, your employee. The positive attitude or whatever good, you empower it and you give them a positive feedback. But on the other hand, when you get a negative attitude and something which is like infectious, you need to counsel, you need to monitor, you need to have that in hand, and you need, and should be for sure as you will manage that individual negative attitude, because once you can manage it, so you need to have a proper counsel, proper management of that attitude, and once you cannot control it, then it will be like infection to other. And this I encountered in the art within other organization, my ex-organization. But sometimes it's very, very important to have like a one-to-one counseling or one-to-one understanding with that person who have a negative attitude, because it will affect the others.
True.
Because once you keep, as a leader, as a manager, once you keep silent, or you can handle him or her, the employee, then they take advantage, as we know, and all of us for sure you face this thing. But again, from my experience, I go back and tell them we are here, and from my experience, and also I did it in daily debates. Every morning I greet my team, and I see their reaction as a morning, because once you see them and you see they are in good shape and in good mental health and status, psychological and all, from that status you can make up the day. Yeah, today their day is good. You cannot that immediate, but sometimes it's very important to make that in mind, to keep that in mind. Then you start your day once, because sometimes it's very essential. If one of your team member is having a bad day or bad attitude, then it will affect the entire work and the entire team. This is my small feedback on that. And it's very essential. Attitude is very, very important and very critical. It's not well managed and well organized then. That's it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that to add to that, Vidusha and Anton, is what if a person is having a bad hair day? Okay, now all of us have that, but if we are going to determine the person's performance based on that one day and hold him totally, in shackles just because he did that day, then it's a bit ridiculous, and we're not it's not just the ones that we're actually making a mistake that is going to be creating a whole lot of havoc, but it's about truly engaging. As I keep coming back to engaging, I truly believe that that's one of the most important things is can we actually assist people to be brilliant? And as Mishra Babi just now mentioned, it is about really getting in touch with people and finding out how they're doing. I think we've lost that compassion most of the time.
Sure, and I think just to add to that, I think one of the critical things is, since you brought up negativity and negative attitudes, I'll just differentiate that into two, possibly three. The first is actually a negative attitude per se from the perspective of, I don't like how you come across. The second is, so that's a very personal thing. So I don't like it. The second is the kind of negative attitudes from the perspective of something that is detrimental to the organization or its culture. And that's more behavior. And the third is actually something that borderlines on negligence and willful destruction, right? You need to differentiate between, if it's a personal thing where you called me out in a way that I don't necessarily like, that's something that needs to be solved between the two of us. If it is something that actually is going against the organizational values, there are two options to this as well. Maybe one of it is that the individual doesn't quite understand that they're doing something that is negative, in which case you need to have a conversation. The second is, you know that you're doing something wrong, but you're doing it nonetheless. And for that too, you need to find out where that's coming from and then take appropriate action. The third one, however, and there are rare occasions of this. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning wanting to willfully harm the organization they work for. I don't think that happens, right? I mean, there's probably a very, very slight minority of people like that, but by most people don't. But if you are doing willful harm and being negligent of your duties and responsibilities, that's a performance conversation you need to have. Because you have been trained, you have been coached, you know what needs to happen, and you willfully do not engage for whatever reason. And that's a performance conversation you need to have. So when you talk about negative people, I think, or negative attitudes, I think you need to differentiate between the three, because the kind of action you would take between these three would be fundamentally different.
Thanks, Vidusha. Thanks, Jennifer, for that. And Samira, thank you for bringing out that point. So just before we dive in, so I understand the attitude depends and we need to be careful as to how we look at it. But can I just go right into the positive attitude that Samira brought about? And from that perspective, let's go right into what I want to call is being proactive, right? One of the, in terms of attitude, always leads to, I've got my job, I'm doing it, and I'm happy where I am. And, when my boss tells me I'll get it done, or someone tells me I'll get it done. But that whole proactiveness, and I've seen this in N number of organizations, and it's not specific to a country or culture. I think it's a global issue, right? And it's waiting to be told, for me, is almost like trying to go on your first date, right? You're waiting for that good moment, that right moment to ask this girl or ask this boy, and just to go. But by the time you wait, the opportunity is lost. And for all you know, somebody else has come and asked her and she's gone on a date. Or the opposite, or the flip side of the coin, and I find this hilarious, is risk taking. Just dive right in and go in and make a blunder of yourself, make a fool of yourself. And you haven't thought this one through. You don't know what to say. Girl looks at you, boy looks at the girl, and that's the end of that date. Now, being proactive, and I understand waiting for the moment, and I understand trying to calculate the right kind of moment to take. But the concern here is taking that initiative and being proactive, to me, is a very subtle art. Anyone who aims to be successful clearly needs to hone in to this particular piece, right? But why do people shy away from this proactive approach? I mean, is it a case of shrugging responsibility off, let me not touch that? Is it a case of complacence? Is it the fear of being overloaded? Now, if I become proactive, I'm going to get, my boss is going to land everything on my head, and then I'm going to sit here and end up doing this forever. Let's not ask for trouble. Let me just be happy, do my job and go. Why do people shy away? And I'm really curious. I don't know. Vidusha, you want to take a go at this one? See you.
Yeah, I think I will. No, I've been itching kind of the moment you started speaking on this, because it's something that I think, even though you say it's a global phenomena, I think it's culturally rooted too. Given let me clarify that it's culturally rooted based on how we are brought up. For most of us in this part of the world, where we go through higher education, our normative education, as well as our higher education, in a rather structured environment where the teacher is the personification of everything inside the classroom, and you shall keep quiet until you're pointed at to ask a question, and you will not jump the gun. That's deeply inherently embedded into your behavior. So let me just give you 3 examples of this and pass it on to Jennifer. So the first is one of my great friends and mentors called Tony Nadaraja told me this, and it stuck in my mind forever. So I'll share that with you, right? So he turns around and says, look, Vidusha, if you're an employee of any level, you need to understand that you need to observe the natural environment for inspiration. If you take a look at a tortoise, the tortoise is a very secure animal. Nothing can harm it. Absolutely nothing can harm it. But understand, even the most apex predator cannot do anything to it as long as it's in its shell. But its most protective time is also still. You can't go anywhere. So if the tortoise has to move, it needs to stick its head out. And that is when it's most vulnerable also. And if you want to lead, forget securing your job. If you want to lead, then you need to stick your head out and take a gamble with it, because that's the only way you move forward. So that was one story. The second one is to kind of tell you that risk and our appetite for risk is something that I think is innately inherent to each one of us in different degrees. And there's no right and wrong answer in this. Now, my mother generally always tells me that I'm a very impatient person. I'm also a person who took 7.5 years to build a house. I don't know if that is not being patient. I don't know what is, right?
And if I may add, in the jungle too. So
in the jungle too, absolutely. Mind you, right? 7.5 years. So these things are varying degrees based on how you kind of look at it. But here's the trick to it. I think the trick to it is to be proactive from the perspective of knowing what to be proactive about and what not to be proactive about. I think you need to have that judgment call. You can't be a jack in the box for everything. There are times when you need to kind of do your risk analysis. It's a bit like COVID. It's a classic example. You can't turn around and say, you know what, let's take a risk with this. Let's just open up the factory and, see what happens. You can't, it's being, it's plain stupid to do that, no matter how confident you are. Right? I mean, there's times when you have to kind of really take a look at it. The third one, since you pointed it out, Anton, is this. Now, there is a very real risk. They say the donkey that gets the biggest load is the one that carries the biggest load. And that is true of employment as well. If you're the kind of one who put your hand up and say, let me take a crack at it, you're going to be overburdened with things. Now, if you're the kind of person who puts your hand up, you can't berate someone for giving it to you because they trust you. And I think it's a great thing. Now, 2 things can happen. The first is you'll get overloaded and you'll be able to see through. That has 2 ways. The first is you'll learn a hell of a lot more than somebody else. And 2, you'll do a lot more than somebody else, both of which are positives. The second is you'll get overburdened to the point where you start cracking, and the proverbial the hair that actually breaks the camel's back, right? Now, you need to be mature enough in your employment to be able to call that out and say, look, you know what? I really am getting a little burdened? Is it possible for me to maybe put some of these things aside, delegate some of them, or can I do this a little later? That conversation you must be able to have. But as a principle, I think if you put your hand up and you want to be proactive, you must be okay about the fact that you'll probably be the person who does the most amount of work. That's inevitable, even in families.
True. Absolutely true.
Jennifer, to add your thoughts to that, but also I'm curious to ask you, and I do understand where this is coming in from, right? So there is the element, and as I said at the onset, this is a very subtle art. You've got to be to balance knowing when to be proactive, when to dive in, when to sort of take that calculated risk, and look at the environment. And I really don't know whether to think about the tortoise, the camel, or the donkey that Vidusha brought out. But at the end of the day, that is reality as it is, right? But being proactive at work, I also want to ask you, and you've been in the Middle East for some time, right? You've been in Kuwait and you've been in Dubai for quite a while, and you've seen organizations. A, your thoughts on being proactive. B, how do organizations promote the ethos in workplace within teams? How do you nurture that? How do you cultivate that?
Very good question. The way that personally, I remember being an employee too. And it was always about not being asked, but volunteering. The way that I thought it was that if I wanted something to really work well within a company where I was working, then I would like to bring some changes and do things in a certain different way. Now, fortunately for me, the organizations that I worked with were very, very helpful in actually helping me to achieve anything that I wanted to do, because I was able to give to them what it is that it's going to deliver for the organization as a whole. Okay, a simple example: we were in recruitment. I was an employee in a recruitment company, and we had a whole lot of data, but it was all in paper format. We didn't have computers at that time, so we had this amazing system there where we had to file in all the details. But it was more about how can we segregate the stuff to relate to what the clients are looking for, that helped to facilitate the speed at which we delivered. Because it was about clarity and quality and speed that we had to actually deliver and quickly do the work. But I remember not having any situations or anywhere where my boss or my colleagues ever said, you know what, you're wasting your time, or you should be doing this. Because they saw the value of how it was going to impact all of us. So I think that is something that when we are suggesting something as bosses and saying, this is what it is that I'd like to have done, let us also share with the rest of the team and the organization as to the value addition is going to create for the whole organization and us as individuals as well. I think that is something that we have to have clarity about. And clarity is very essential, where we are actually talking about telling people to do something. How is it going to impact? And that is what engagement is. Are we having those kind of conversations? Are we just giving orders, or are we truly looking at ourselves as a flat organization? I mean, whether you're a CEO or you are a helper or a T-boy, the one thing that is absolutely for sure is you are a person. So how are we showing up at work? If there was no disparity and there were no designations, who would you be then? What change can you bring then? I think that is one. And the second one that you asked, Anton, could you remind me what it is? Because I got so excited about talking the first one.
How do organizations promote that ethos within? How do you encourage that? Because
I think it's thank you for that. The way that I've seen it within organizations is that companies usually will always give a free hand to anyone who would like to do something. It's more about the employee. How many of us as employees would really like to step up, as you said, you've got to stick your neck out. Would you want to actually do that? Are you comfortable doing that? That is your personal choice. As taking a risk is a personal choice. You can't force it on anyone else, but you can actually choose to do that for yourself and actually know, and you very rightly said, Vidusha, earlier on, it's not then blaming the organization for giving it to you. You chose it. Okay? So every time that we are not making a choice, and then we are creating something that is going to be not related to what it is that we are choosing, is going to create confusion, not only for us, but everyone else around us. I think organizations out there are really willing to help people, but as employees, we also have to step up, truly.
Absolutely. And just the one small addition before Anton asks the next question. The only thing I want to add to that, absolutely, totally. From a leadership perspective, if you're senior management, just one word of caution though. When you see people stepping up and when you see people actually going that extra mile and so on and so forth, be conscious and cautious about the volume of work you dish out to them. Because it's sometimes a little overwhelming when people keep piling it on, and sometimes it's a little awkward to go and say no. So be mindful of that. But as long as you know you're helping them through and supporting them through, people will rise up. So the very people who actually do step up shouldn't be the ones who feel the brunt of it, if you're in a leadership position. But if you're on the other side of the fence where you're just starting out or you're in middle management and you step up and people start giving it to you, the earlier one I said, will learn to kind of be able to be comfortable enough to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And the other thing, Vidusha, is like, what if you were inundated with a whole lot of work, and what if you were getting overwhelmed? My question to you is this: would you be able to actually ask for help?
Sure, absolutely.
Because people just don't do it. They think they have to do it, and now if I don't do it, then I'm going to be wrong, and then I'm going to be judged. Get over that. If you're overwhelmed and you're overworked, please say, guys, I'd love to do this, but I need some help over here. Is there anyone else that I can choose to actually work with me? Be open to doing that. Seriously.
I have to agree, because if you are taking on, or if you want to be proactive, I think you also need to be okay with A, the load, and B, whatever happens as a result of that decision that you've made. It's your choice. But my career, even with HSBC, I can tell you for a fact, and Vidusha and I've had this conversation where I have taken on a number of responsibilities by putting my hands up, but that was my choice wanting to learn. But I also knew the risks that came with it, i.e., no family, no responsibilities, and I could spend more time at work, but it meant that I was going to spend more time at work. But after taking it on, there's no point in me sitting and complaining that I can't do this, I can't go out, I can't go with my friends, I can't go partying. Well, it's a choice, right? But what Vidusha brought out, which is, as leaders, now that we've gone through it, and I guess that's the benefit of the lesson in life, is that now that we've gone through similar, how do we then pass that benefit back to our subordinates, to our peers, where when they volunteer to take on, or they show the right attitude in being proactive, are we overlooking them, or are we doing it in calculated measures? But let me take you from that to a part of being, the calculated bit is, and I remember one of my bosses, Mark Webster, insane, but a good boss, in case he listens to the recording at some point in time. Very good boss. His biggest challenge, and people feared him for nothing else, but he used to be very outright in telling us, if you got a problem, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution. And it kind of, freaked out a lot of us. And people used to be scared to go up and approach him, right? And it took us a while, but the lesson in that is, he's not telling us not to bring his problem. But in your eagerness to explain the problem, He is asking us to find plausible solutions. Is he expecting 100%, workable, spot-on solution to the problem? Hell no. But he wants us to try, or wanted us to try, and kind of get creative in identifying, to think about the problem so that we can think of some possible solution that may or may not work, but at least we've given it a go. Now, the reason I'm telling you that, and Jennifer, and I'm going to sort of ask you this, I guess, is, and this is something that Vidusha touched on earlier on as well, right? From a leadership perspective, do we as leaders in organizations provide enough, can I say, opportunity for problem solving, for individuals to get that creative, for organizations to sort of, not to quell that trait that individuals may have, that, someone's being proactive, someone's helping out, because that's also part of being proactive, right? I want to try and give my solution to this particular problem. Are we creating enough opportunities within organizations to sort of nurture that attitude?
A good one. I have experienced and I've seen it with many organizations that organizations are constantly wanting results all the time. Whether the person, the employee, or anyone who's working with them is having situations, not being able to do certain things. Sometimes we tend to, and I'm responsible for that as well. I mean, I've done it with my team as well, is we tend to push to such an extent that we don't allow for any errors. And especially if you have been a perfectionist, like I have been, and I will agree to that, we tend to actually force our point of view constantly on how things have to be, and not giving a chance to anyone to actually be able to come up with solutions to the situations that we might see as problematic. Okay, so if organizations are only wanting results, but are not giving leeway to the employees to truly be able to come up with solutions, which may not, as you mentioned, may not render a result that might be actually working at that moment, but is it encouraging people to actually open up to give solutions to any foreseeable problems in the future? And instead of waiting for any problem to actually hit us in the face, my question is this: why is it that we're not having simulations and workshops of situations that may occur, instead of being slapped into our face like COVID, for example, where all of us are like going helter-skelter and not knowing what to do? So are we doing simulations? I guess not. So maybe that's something that we may want to look at. Let's do some simulations of problem solving. I'm quite sure, Vidusha, you must have something under your sleeve right now.
I was when you were speaking, something from Remember the Titans came into mind. It's a fantastic movie. If you haven't watched it, watch it, please.
Yeah.
It's one of those great movies, and in it there is a little statement that they make, which is attitude is a reflection of leadership, and it's true. I honestly think it's the culture we create, and what it is what it is. Now, answering your question, Anton, and I think Jennifer was absolutely spot on. We should be doing more simulations, and in fact, most of our organizations would have done a strategic plan. And if you really did look at it, every single strategic plan actually has identifiable risks. And one of the identifiable risks has always been, and I'm talking 15 years back when I did my last one for an organization as an employee, we did identify, because we used to have chickenpox as a big epidemic. And inside a factory where you have an AC environment, it spreads like wildfire. And we used to have contingency plans for that. And it's very, very similar to the kind of contingencies we had for COVID. Now, the point is, we knew from our suppliers in Sri Lanka, we knew from our suppliers in China that this was going to hit epidemic proportions, pandemic proportions. We never bothered because we're an island nation, isn't it? And we thought, hey, you know what, as long as we control our borders, we should be fine. So we should be taking it far more seriously. But something that in very simple terms that you can borrow from the military is this. In most of the world's militaries, there is something called mission command. Mission command is where the top generals actually make decisions and the juniors on the ground have to follow it. But here's the trick. We generally think that the military is one of the most hierarchical, dogmatic organizational structures there is. But even in that most rigidly hierarchical structure, there's one simple rule that they follow, which is tell what you want done. Never tell how it needs to be done. And I think that's a golden piece of advice. As long as you follow that, I think a lot of things will smoothen out. Because if you go and specify how it needs to be done, that's when people keep coming to you and saying, I have this problem, I have this problem. But if you set out the objective and allow people on the ground who know the terrain well enough to make those decisions, as long as you know what the objective is, there can be many ways of skinning a cat, right? So go out there and do what you need to do. That's your freedom, that's your solution, that's your creativity, that's your innovation that comes in. But the fundamental mistake we make is that we don't differentiate between the what and the how. We tend to tell both. Even to our kids, we don't tell only the expectation. We tell them exactly how to do it as well. And I remember my mother telling me how to study. And I study with my music, and I study with music on. I used to have Michael Jackson blaring on my headphones when I study. And my mother, to this day, does not believe that I actually studied. Because in her mind, you cannot possibly study with music blaring. But the how is for me. Having said that, I must admit, I'm guilty as charged as well for being that with my kids. Whereas I do the complete opposite, where I tell them, you know what, you must have a little bit of fun studying. Why don't you put some music on, right? And my daughter looks at me and says, are you nuts? I want complete silence to study. And I find that hard to believe because she's the complete opposite of me. So the golden rule is tell what needs to happen, but don't specify how it needs to be done.
I am
different strokes for different folks.
Absolutely. I am mindful of the time. So I'm just, and thank you for that, Vidusha, and thank you for kicking that particular point off in the right direction, Jennifer. But another area that I do want to touch that concerns, when it comes to showing up at work is a terminology that we hear quite often, right? Which is professionalism. And there are any number of definitions for it, but when it comes to your work, and this is again, I suppose from an employee perspective, doing a job and having a career, and I know there's an element of attitude involved. I'm keen to sort of understand, keeping that in the background, where does professionalism come into play and how do you gauge it? Vidusha, can I throw you under the bus for this one?
Sure. I have a simple answer for that, and I'll pass it on to Jennifer. I think if you really want to understand what professionalism is, I think you need to look at a doctor who delivers a baby. And that's it. If your wife is expecting and she tells you what you dread to hear, which is, oops, my water's broken, I need to go to hospital. You turn up in the hospital and you call up your doctor. You don't really care whether he's had his lunch or not, whether he's had a bad day or not. You don't really worry about whether the anesthetist and the doctor is getting along fine or not. You don't really care whether all the equipment that is there needs to function right or not. You want the doctor to come immediately and deliver your baby. That's it. And we expect it of them, irrespective of the circumstances, correct? And 99.9% of the time, they do deliver. And if you expect that of your doctor, and you remember this simple example, you will know exactly how to turn up and be professional. Everything else is secondary. You will get the job done. And if you expect that of your doctor, under all those trying circumstances, I mean, we might not always be able to meet that standard, but I think that's always what I gun for. If my client calls me up and says, Vidusha, I want this done, getting it done is paramount. What I have to deal with it in order to get it delivered is my business. That's professionalism.
Jennifer, before you dive into that, right? And I know you've definitely got something. Like I said, I can see that the cogs churning at the back. But professionalism is what everyone expects, and they talk about it, right? It's beyond paper qualifications, right? It has a lot to do with the attitude, your thinking, your being present in the moment, getting it delivered as is expected of you. Question, can this be nurtured, Jennifer?
Wonderful. The question over here is, are you happy in the way that you are showing up? I mean, are you truly in awe of how amazing you are? You're not just going to work just because you've got a job and you have to deliver. My question is, how are you showing up? And what does that even mean when I'm saying that? It's like if you are stuck in traffic and you're late and you have an appointment and you're not going to be there in time, what are you going to do? Are you going to call the person and say, I'm really sorry, I'm running late? Or are you going to just push it underneath the carpet and say, you know what, I do not know what to do. Oh my God, how is he going to react? No, show up. Literally, show up. And be authentic with who you are and what it is that you would like to deliver. You're not going to be perfect, so stop running on perfection, because quite honestly, perfection is the biggest limitation. You can be perfect for a moment. After that, it's gone. The question over here is, are you willing to be the leader in your life? What does that mean to you? Because it's going to be what it means to you is going to be different to what it means to me. Because each one of us is a leader. So if you can stop complaining and pointing fingers and blaming the whole universe, the people, the bosses, or peers that, oh, poor me, I'm victimized and it's not going to happen because of this and because of that. Stand up for yourself. Because unless you don't stand for you, guess what? You're not going to be perceived as professional in any case. You got to actually take the risk to show up and then make things actually happen for you and the organization. Because we're looking for leaders here. We're not looking for people who are just going to, come sit, fill the space at the desk or in the chair and then take off and get a salary at the end of the day. I never worked like that. I was an employee too. One of the things I remember constantly telling me was, I'm not here to just fill a seat. I'm here to be that ambassador of the organization. I'm here to make a difference. And when you can actually show up like that, guess what, guys? The bosses that you're working for, yes, they will give you more responsibility, but you also have to know how to navigate that to create teams of leaders that you have within the organization. That is important too. I mean, that's my personal point of view. I truly believe that each one of us is a leader. And that's where professionalism comes in. Are you willing to be that for you?
Thank you for that. Sorry, I am mindful of time, and I'm going to take that professionalism and kind of circle it back to where we originally started this afternoon, which was adding value. And Jennifer, you rightly mentioned about showing up, right? And that's what it is. It's not a job, it's a career. It's your attitude, it's you being proactive. And I remember one of my bosses who brought out an example, and very early on in my career, and I still remember that. And he spoke about, at that time, the Swiss watches. And I distinctly remember this because Swiss are known for their precision, right? And he spoke about how the Swiss watch is so expensive because the mechanism that they use is, it's highly priced, it's precise. The standards are very high. The parts, the materials are very high. And you look at the way that they work, the cogs, the wheels, they all efficiently do their jobs. And in that sense, right, There are no extra parts, there are no imperfect parts, and everything works in perfect synchronization. And he compared that to an organization as to how an effective organization needs to work in perfect synchronization, right? But for that to happen, every individual needs to add value to the job and not just get the job done, right? So in today's day and age, when you're not just expected to establish your role as a contributor to the organization, but the question is, how do you add value? So what I want to ask you is, how do you differentiate that? How do you ensure that people are able to differentiate themselves in that context, Jennifer? And then I'll come back to Vidusha.
I think the most essential part is that we've got to have more engagement. We've got to have more questions. And thank you, Vidusha, for putting that there. We're not, this whole conversation is not talking at people. We're talking to you. And that's why we require engagement from you. And these conversations that we're going to be having are going to be totally unconventional. You will hear the weirdest things that we'll be talking about. And we are not status quo. We're here to actually break these paradigms and go beyond what it is and how it is that we've been working. What was working before, quite honestly, is not working anymore. So we really have to look at things in a different perspective. But coming back to your question, and so it's about how do you add value? Do you know your own personal values? Okay. If you do not consider you to be valuable, my question is, how are you going to add value to anyone else? So the values, the funny part is this, the values are not different from your home to your relationships or to work. The values are values. And some of the values that I work with, and I think go across everything that I do, is this. Am I respectful? Yes. Do I care for people? Yes. Do I care for people at the home? Do I care for people on the road? Do I care for people who are stuck in COVID? Yes. It's the same kind of values that actually that translate across everything that you be and do. Whether you're at work, whether you're at home, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're anywhere. It's a value. The question over here is, the values that we have right now, are they adding value to you? And as a result, to the organization that you're actually with and in.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for that, Jennifer. Like I said, I am mindful of the time. So we've kind of come to the end of this particular topic for today. I'd like to hear some questions. Since no one wants to show their faces, I have to be content with looking at Vidusha and Jennifer. And thank you, Gaurav. And I think Amita momentarily pops in and pops out, but thank you for that. But I've got 3 questions that come my way anonymously. Thank you very much on WhatsApp. So you can use WhatsApp, you can use the chat option, but do ask your questions, anything at all related to the topic that any one of us can respond. But let me throw this one at either Vidusha or Jennifer. Jennifer, maybe, because do you think a life coach can fix and develop an attitude?
Just want to make a small promise that we will not be, we promise not to be offended by any questions. So feel free to throw it at us.
Yes, and this is an open thing. Guys, we're not here to offend anybody. We're not here to defend ourselves either. We are here to actually make a shift and change. And you've got to ask the questions to make it happen. Because we can't be sitting on status quo. Stop sitting on the fence.
I do have a question.
Wonderful. Diksha.
Okay. I have often seen.
Can we see you, Diksha? Maybe?
Wait. Excuse me, from this time, next 4, you'll see my face.
Okay, cool.
Okay, the question is that often seen this, that there are few, so in a team, you'll see that there are few employees who are motivated, who come and know that, okay, that push within themselves is there. But then there are certain employees, whatever you might do, whatever incentives you might give them also, they still, I mean, it's a constant battle to really I mean, to really get, I mean,
Tell them to do something.
they'll do their job, but they'll not do anything extra. They'll not have the enthusiasm for the job. Even if they're like, okay, even if you ask them, is there something, you know, I've had one-to-ones with some of them, and I'm like, okay, is there anything I need to do which would change your behavior, change your mindset at work? You're not comfortable. They'll not say anything. They'll be very happy when you're talking to them. But when it comes to going back to the routine and all, there's no, maybe on an individual level they're like that, but is it possible to bring a shift in such people?
Good question. Vidusha, please.
To that question, Diksha, I'm guessing this is not your WhatsApp question, but there is a question and I will club that in as well. So thank you for that, Diksha. The question says, how do I encourage someone to be proactive? Can it be taught? So yes, I guess it's in line with exactly what Diksha is asking. I think Diksha just sent me a WhatsApp at the same time, decided to ask the question in case. So she's covering her tracks, which is perfectly fine. Vidusha, you want to take a go?
Yeah, I will, from a slightly different perspective, have a little bit of empathy and sympathy or whatever towards people like this, because I often, when people ask me this question, I have a wide big grin on my face simply because I remember my dad. Okay, my dad worked as a lecturer for the University of Sri Jagadhanapura, and he taught politics for 37 years, and he never got a promotion for 37 years, okay? And every time he was asked this question, he actually asks the panel. They used to actually have to, every year, once you have a certain tenure, you have to actually apply to become a senior lecturer and then a registrar and a professor and so on and so forth, right? So every year when he applies, every year, right? So when he gets called in, one of the questions that gets asked is, do you have any questions? And my father always asks this one question: if I take this new appointment, would I have to do more work? And would I have to stay later than 4:15? And the invariable answer is yes, you have to wait until 4:15 because there's additional work that you have to do as a senior that you have to do for a junior. And he says, then he asks the question, if I which case I guess I'll try next year, right? So he tried this for 37 years and the answer was always no. And I asked him, why not stay after 4:15? And he told me, you know what? You are at home. You come home after school and you generally come home by about 2:33. You're home alone. My mother worked as well. And I'm the closest to the house and I would come home. So if I have to wait after 4:15, I won't. So there are people like that who are perfectly happy doing their job. And he's 78. My Anton knows this, right? He's 79. He's 80 next year. He's one of the happiest people you know. He never bothered about the fact that he didn't get promoted. He was perfectly happy doing the same job, 37 long years. I would find him to be the most unsuccessful person on the planet because I still don't know a single person who actually did a job for 37 years and never got promoted. At least because you felt sorry for the poor soul that you would have given a promotion, right? He didn't even get that. But he's a supremely happy person. But jokes apart, let me answer your question in two ways. The first is, first find out whether they want to do that or not, for whatever reason. If they don't, for whatever reason, you can get into the reasons afterwards, then it's a different conversation. The second is to understand if they do want to, but something's holding them back, then it's a different conversation. So one is, do you really want to do more work or not? And the second is to ask whether they are okay, like my dad, if you didn't go anywhere else. In which case it's a win-win because they don't want to really do any more work. They're happy doing what they do. They're really good at what they do. Let them continue. There's no harm. Each to his own, I think. And in organizations, if everybody were really, really driven and really, really ambitious, I think you'll have a problem set there that you won't be able to solve. So having people who are content with their workload, not wanting to do absolutely anything more, as long as they are understanding that they're probably not going to go anywhere inside the organization. As long as we're clear about that, I think you should be okay, would be my contention to it.
I think it makes a whole lot of sense. It truly is. So you have the ones who are the pushers, the movers, the shakers, and you have the ones who are the ones who would love to carry on in the way that they are carrying on. But you need this kind of people. It takes all kinds to actually create an organization. And if you have someone who is going to be okay with being a receptionist and does that remarkably well as like an art form, then I think that is cool for them. And if you're happy with that, allow them to do that. But as Vidusha says, they also know that they're not going to go anywhere and they're going to have no promotions and they're still okay with working with it. Go for it. Let them do it.
Yeah, be my guest, right?
But I guess in a sense, they are adding value to the organization.
Yes.
Of course.
They're able
Of course.
to do the mundane task that is expected of them.
But again, Anton, who decides whether it's mundane? They don't see it as mundane. They see it as being an art form.
Right.
And they have fun doing it and they enjoy it.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, they won't be doing it, right? So it is our personal perception of how we look at things. And I love how Wayne Dyer said this. When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So it is all our personal perceptions of what is and what is not.
And
that's what we have to give a thought to. Yeah.
And that is the point. Absolutely. It's just the way we look at it. And we possibly think that they're not adding, but they are. And I do kind of resonate with what Vidusha brought out about his dad, working with HSBC for that many years in the back office work. Our counterparts in China, which is one of the first centers to be set up, guys for 15, 20, 22 years did nothing but just hit the keys and do the same process. Now, they didn't come up with creative ideas, innovative stuff, none of that. They just come in, do that, take their 3 breaks that they're entitled for, including their meal break, come back in, 5 o'clock done, thank you very much, go home. Now, there were never issues about attrition, there were never worries about promotions and hard conversations and performance reviews, none of that. They were happy with what it is, and it was all measured on your quality and speed and etc. Everyone was happy. You take that back to India, or you take that back to Sri Lanka, or you take that to Malaysia, the teams were much different. The competition was higher, people wanted to be creative, people wanted to be, but they're same level, doing the same job for the same process. So perspectives matter, but individuals choosing what they want to do in their own way matters. It's a choice that people make. So I guess unless and until someone is keen to do more or want to do more, there isn't anything much anyone else can do. You can't really force them onto it, because then you run a different kind of risk.
And then it is the choice. I think this choice of the owners of the business is whether you perceive that as being an important role for the person to be doing, whether you are wanting to take the organization to another level, but you see that this particular job that the person is doing is becoming quite redundant, then it is, again, a question of how it is that you address situations with people. And I think that's where engagement is so necessary. To be in communication is the key for any situation.
Absolutely. Vidusha, any final thoughts from your end?
No, you had one more question though there, right?
No, but that kind of was covered in terms of, I think you answered that earlier on, and I looked at that in terms of environment, being very casual, how do I maintain that sense of professionalism? But you kind of answered that earlier on, but to add.
Can I just add,
sorry to interrupt, gentlemen. I have another part to my own question.
Of course,
you guys, as you guys are aware that Japan as a culture, people work 14, 15 hours a day, right? And they're all motivated to do it. it cannot, I mean, it's probably the innate ability to do it, and plus it's the work culture over there, right? They all literally, there's some of them who sleep in the elevators because they have to get up and go in the morning in the same building. Now my question is that I mean, where does that spark in them come? Like, okay, is it that they know they have to be like this, or what you guys were trying to say is right. You know, there are some people who would just do their work, leave. They'll do their work properly and then they leave. But how long can that go in this ever-changing environment? And now, you know, work cultures are changing. It's more interactive. There is a youth element, there is a senior element. Everybody's working in cohesion. So, you know, it's not just the mindset probably of how it used to be is not how it is. There are some very young entrepreneurs running organizations with youth in them, and then there could be seniors in them. I mean, their mindsets are different, and there is an imbalance, and it's ever changing. So I mean, how do you address that?
Awesome question, Diksha. Thank you for that. Vidusha, do you want to go, or should I talk on that?
No,
I like that.
Go for it. I have a joke if time is permitting. Can I throw a joke in here?
Please go ahead.
Diksha, do you know why Japan is Japan?
Because of its people.
Yes, you know the speciality about their people. There's something about Japan. We do a lot of Lean Six Sigma kind of work and process improvement, and this is a standard joke we always throw at them. Do you know why Japan is Japan and Japanese are Japanese? Because Japan probably is the only country on the planet where you have a homogeneous population. There's only Japanese, right? Right? It's the only country on the planet that you can say that of. Think about it. Very hard.
Right.
So if you take a look at a Japanese culture, for nearly 2,500 years, it has been embedded from the time of the emperor even to the modern day. Bushido is embedded into the Japanese culture. So you don't have anyone from outside of Japan, apart from people who go and work. Of course, there are people who go and work, but it's a very, very, very small minority of people. But if you take a look at it, the way they live and the way they've been brought up are by and large the same. And the standard joke is that Japanese babies don't cry, right? And so the first time we ever went there, we kind of told ourselves, this is all lies. We all know that, kids cry, right? Newborns cry. That's just the way it is. And everyone who came from there used to tell us this, Japanese babies don't cry. It's amazing and all this. So we told ourselves, okay, we'll test this out. So we went on a train, and lo and behold, there were kids crying. And he said, there you go, this is all nonsense. And then we actually went into the compartment where the kids were crying, and they were Sri Lankan kids, right? Not Japanese kids. Right? Japanese kids don't cry. You know why? Because they're never held. They are allowed to cry as much as they want. They're fed only at certain times. And they know, therefore, to just wake up for a very tiny moment in time and give a yelp. And if the mother does not respond, they just turn back and get back to whatever they were doing. Okay? Whereas in our part of the world, you will be carried. You'll be never put down. Your mother will be carried, father will be carrying, grandmother will be carrying, uncles will be carrying, everybody's carrying, right? So it's a very different environment. So Japan is a bad example to throw because it has certain uniqueness of the inherent culture as well as their upbringing, as well as their modalities that defines the kind of work ethic they have. I think it's unique to the entire world. So looking at them and drawing a comparison, my God, is very, very difficult because it's very difficult for us to kind of...
Agreed. Then what would your answer be in terms of the diverse and ever-changing cultures in today's time?
Look, that is a three-step process. The first is you got to understand that even though we talk about change, and change happens anyway, whether you like it or not, right? The question is whether we make conscious changes or not. And for that, Jennifer answered very beautifully when she said that there are two things in the three that she already mentioned. So engagement is one, open communications is one. You have to have that on an ongoing basis. The third thing I think that we have to provide as leadership is very clear direction. Now, the problem is that we assume that when we do changes, that direction also changes. Now, when you change direction all the time, that's when people go into a state of flux. So change the ways you do things, change the processes, change the systems, change everything else. But direction, I think to a large extent should be static, because otherwise we have no idea where we are going. So engage people, communicate with them, but set direction very clearly. As long as you do that, I think, yeah, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. On the point of engagement, for how long, you know, because I deal with very different ages, I have come across this, and the youth which is coming up, if they don't want to speak, they will not. Even if you can't be talking to a wall all the time, and I'm talking about having spoken to many, and it's the upcoming youth I'm talking about, because we've taken a lot of interns to train with us, and I've seen this. You cannot, it's like talking to a stone after some time. I mean, you want to engage, you'll keep making the effort, but I mean, it cannot be a one-sided effort, right?
Sure.
What do you do in a circumstance like that?
So, Diksha, may I just ask a question
Right.
to your question? What is it that you want to get from these people that they're not delivering?
Engagement.
Okay. Is it the engagement that you think that they should give, or is there any engagement that you think that they can come up with themselves? Is that an engagement how you think it should be, or have you opened up the forum for anyone to actually make any suggestions?
See, I don't know if I'm trying to put the question correctly then.
No, you have done it brilliantly. What I'm asking is that most of the time, and I'm talking from personal experiences, when we talk about engagement, we constantly are wanting to look at how engagement has to be from our perception of engagement. Now, obviously, when someone is not responding, we get infuriated and irritated, like, my God, I'm trying to engage here. Why are you not engaging with me? And you almost are coming in like you know, showing up like a stone. But have we tried to find out what actually enthuses them? What's fun for them? So as Vidusha says, our direction of what it is that we'd like to achieve, this has to be a constant. How we get there is what it is that we are creating as the proper navigation for the creation of engagement that truly inspires everyone on the team. Different strokes for different folks.
Okay.
Can I give an example for that, if that helps you, Diksha? The example I'll cite is from the workplace itself, right? So we had this engagement survey that happens every year, and we noticed that there was a gradual decline in the overall score. And the HR department used to do a lot of engagement-related work. And when you ask the question, did you take part in this? Did you like, et cetera, the answers are always positive, but the overall engagement score is always negative. And this was a perplexing thing. And you are right. The different age groups actually weighed in on this, because they did a segregation on it and found that it was the newcomers and the youngest of the groups from an age perspective who were actually scoring the lowest. And so we kind of did a small survey of our own when we went into this assignment. And we asked ourselves the question, we told ourselves that we will ask the question from an honest perspective versus from a loaded perspective, right? So what we did was we actually asked them the reversal of that, which was, and this is borrowing from what Jennifer just said, right? what do you want from the organization? Number one. Number two, what do you want from your bosses? And number three, we asked them, how would you like to have fun? Okay. And there's a whole heap of other questions in our focus group discussion. I'm not going to get into all of that because I'm mindful of time, right? And I'm happily bat on if you guys are okay, and I can give you tons of examples of this. But here's the interesting point. They had three major events for engagement. They had a New Year celebration, which happens in April in Sri Lanka. They had a Christmas party, which happens in December, obviously. And they also had a company-wide trip, which was a big deal because it was a 2-day affair and lots of money was spent. And it was a very well orchestrated thing. And get this, when they were asked about the trip, they said the trip was great, but how many of you really wanted to go? Would you believe that only 40% really wanted to go on a trip? Okay. So then we opened up that question to say, okay, if it's not a trip, what would it be? And you know what? It was so fragmented that we couldn't arrive at one thing. There was roughly about 10% of people who wanted to have a book club. There was roughly about 5% of people who wanted to play chess. There were nearly 20% of people who wanted to play carom. There was another group of people who wanted to play cricket. There was another group of people who turned around and said, you know what, we want to play video games, out of all things, right? Now you have a dilemma, because our perspective of engagement is everybody getting together and going on this one mad trip and having a gala time, which nobody says is a bad thing, but it's not what they perceive to be of importance for them. And what they did was they actually made 4 clubs, okay? 4 houses. If you, we have in Sri Lankan schools, we have a house system, right? Every kid belongs to a house.
Yeah, same in India.
Great, right. So you created the houses inside the organization, and they had a multitude of events every month on something. So they had sports events, they had classical events, they had dance events, they had chess competitions, carom competitions, and also computer games. Get this, all of the kids, I'm sorry, I'm being derogatory when I say kids, right? And all of the young employees turned out for the gaming competition. It was packed. None of the elders did. Right? Because they didn't know how to play computer games, which was fine. But amazingly, the score went up tremendously because the individual felt that there was something in it for them. So sometimes as organizations, we actually try and create a homogeneous ruling for engagement. But if you fragment it and give people what they want, I think that's a good place to start. Just one other tip on youngsters, right? Generally, youngsters don't have the kind of lucid conversations we have. You have this even with your kids. We are generally a lot more vocal. There are a lot more, on this. And for one of the companies that we work with, we actually set up all of their communication via WhatsApp and Facebook, and it worked. Try something like that as well, because sometimes a lot of the newer generation would not necessarily sit like this and have a conversation, but they just might respond electronically. Amazingly, most people that we send emails to don't reply. We send a WhatsApp message or a messenger message, they generally reply.
I'm probably one of them.
So there you go.
Okay, just to add, thank you for this.
Berate me for this, for even saying it.
No, but thank you so much. It's been wonderful. For the upcoming sessions, I would just request if we could also add now how we could add engagement with work from home environment, and
Sure.
how
because,
yeah.
Sorry, just to kind of quickly add to that, in case I forget to say this at the end to all of you. I genuinely mean this, and this is not a sales pitch. I'm always very conscious when I say these things, Jennifer, because I mean, we are consultants and trainers, and when we say this, it sounds like a sales pitch. So it's not a sales pitch in any way. There is a lot of work that we do pro bono. If it's a specific subject like engagement. It's a wide open conversation. If you all are interested, reach out to Jennifer and let her know. We'll happily carve out an hour, hour and a half, or whatever time that you need, and go into it by detail, because engagement is very contextual, depending on your industry as well as the kind of work that you do. Because the kind of work that you would do specifically in a white collar job would be very different to the kind of engagement you need in a blue collar job. So rather than talking in general terms, if you really get together and just inform Jennifer, just give us a date, and if it's convenient, we'll take this offline, and happy to kind of do an entire session on engagement with some case studies and some actual research work that has been done. Let us know, because then we can actually specifically kind of give you some insights.
Sure.
Wonderful.
Would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So
Most welcome.
mindful, and we will wrap this one up. So thank you for joining in and for staying tuned. Hope you found this to be informative and insightful. Hope we will see you next week as we dive into another topic. Just a quick thank you once again to Jennifer for sorting this, organizing this, and for all that valuable nuggets of information that came out.
And for inviting us.
For your input as always. And we are moving in, but just before we leave, a quick one that next week we're looking at what are you waiting for, a continuation to this, but a bit more. And hopefully we will touch a little bit on that engagement as well. On that note, a quick thank you to Focus Direct, and also to Versatile, High Five, and Luminary. This is brought to you in collaboration with all 4 organizations. Thank you very much once again for your time, for your presence, and for your participation. Good evening. Stay productive.
Before you kind of wind up, if there is anyone here who